The Bridge of Hope. In a small coastal town named Veridale, nestled between the towering cliffs of the northern coastline and the vast, rolling ocean, there lived a young woman named Eliza Warren. The town was quiet and picturesque, with cobbled streets, colorful cottages, and a community that had known one another for generations. But despite the beauty of the town, Eliza often felt a deep sense of loneliness that seemed to stretch as far as the ocean before her. Eliza had lived in Veridale all her life, but she never quite felt like she belonged. Her father, a fisherman, had passed away when she was only 10, and her mother had followed a few years later from a long battle with illness. Left with no immediate family, Eliza was raised by her aunt, Margaret, who ran the local bakery. Aunt Margaret was kind and dependable, but she was a woman of few words, her life revolving around the rhythms of baking and maintaining the small family business. As Eliza grew older, she took on the responsibility of helping her aunt in the bakery. But it was never a passion for her. She dreamed of something more. Something beyond the flour-dusted walls of the bakery and the quiet, insular life of Veridale. But the dreams she had seemed as distant as the horizon she would stare out at from the cliffs on the edge of town. She felt trapped, unsure of how to break free or what steps to take next. It was on one of those solitary walks along the cliffs that Eliza first noticed the man who would change everything. It was an overcast morning, and Eliza had decided to walk the familiar path that curved along the coast, leading to a secluded spot where she often went to think. As she approached her usual resting place, a large, weather-worn rock that jutted out from the cliffs, she saw him for the first time. He was sitting on the rock, legs crossed, with a sketchbook open in his lap. His back was to her, but she could see the concentration in his posture and the steady movements of his hand as he sketched. For a moment, Eliza hesitated, unsure whether to interrupt his solitude. But there was something about him, a sense of calm, as though he belonged in the landscape in a way that she did not. That piqued her curiosity. She decided to approach him. "Hi," she said softly, not wanting to startle him. The man looked up, his deep blue eyes meeting hers. He smiled, not in a way that seemed rehearsed, but in a way that seemed as natural as breathing. "Hello there," he said, his voice warm and inviting. "I didn't expect company. What brings you here today?" Quote. Eliza smiled faintly, sitting down beside him. "I come here often, just to think. You know?" Quote. He nodded. "I understand. The view has a way of putting things into perspective, doesn't it?" Quote. "Yeah," Eliza agreed, her gaze drifting out over the ocean. "It's peaceful, but also lonely, sometimes." The man chuckled lightly. "That's an interesting way to put it. I think I know what you mean. My name's Oliver, by the way." Eliza. They sat in silence for a while, the sound of the ocean waves crashing against the rocks below filling the space between them. Eliza wasn't sure why she felt so comfortable with him, but there was something about his presence that made her feel less isolated. She looked over at the sketchbook in his hands, noting the fine lines and intricate details of the drawings. "Are you an artist?" she asked. Oliver glanced down at his sketchbook and nodded. "I guess you could say that. I'm traveling around, doing sketches of places that inspire me. The ocean here, the cliffs, they're unlike anything I've ever seen. I've been working on this one for days." Eliza leaned closer to get a better look at the drawing. It was a beautiful rendering of the very cliff they were sitting on. The jagged rocks and turbulent sea captured with delicate strokes of graphite. "It's amazing," Eliza said, her voice filled with genuine admiration. You really capture the feeling of this place. Oliver smiled, a little embarrassed by her praise. Thanks. I try. But it's not just the place that makes it special. It's the way people connect with it. You know, the way they see it, experience it, makes all the difference. Eliza paused, considering his words. I've always felt like I don't really connect with anything. Not here. Anyway, I've lived in Veridale my whole life. But it's like I'm always looking for something else. Oliver turned his head toward her, his gaze searching. Something else? Like what? Quote. Eliza hesitated, not quite sure how to articulate the yearning she felt deep inside. I don't know. Something bigger. Something more fulfilling. It's hard to explain. It's like I'm stuck, but I don't know how to move forward. Oliver looked at her thoughtfully, his eyes softening. Maybe the first step is to stop thinking of it as something you're stuck in. You know, the world isn't a place where you wait for things to happen. It's a place where you make things happen. What's something that's always made you feel alive? Quote. Eliza was quiet for a long time. She thought about it, trying to remember a time when she felt that spark of excitement, of purpose. After a few moments, she spoke, her voice tentative. I used to love writing when I was younger. I'd make up stories in my head all the time. But I don't do it anymore. I don't even know why. Oliver nodded, his expression encouraging. There's your answer then. Sometimes we forget the things we love because we're too busy thinking about what we should do. But maybe it's time to remember what you want to do. For the first time in a long while, Eliza felt a flicker of something inside her. A sense of possibility that had been buried beneath years of routine and self-doubt. She realized that Oliver was right. She had been so focused on the idea of needing to escape her small town, to find something more exciting, that she had forgotten about the things that once brought her joy. Over the next few weeks, Eliza began to rediscover her love of writing. She started carrying a notebook with her everywhere, jotting down ideas, thoughts, and stories whenever they came to her. She spent more time at the cliffs, not just in silence, but with her pen in hand, creating stories about the world she saw around her. Sometimes she wrote about the ocean and the wind-swept cliffs, and other times she wrote about faraway lands and characters that lived in worlds entirely different from Veridale. And through it all, she thought of Oliver, the man who had shown her how to look at the world differently. They continued to meet at the cliffs whenever he was in town. And each time, their conversation seemed to go deeper, touching on dreams, fears, and the mysteries of life. Oliver shared his travels with her, and in turn, Eliza shared her stories. Months passed, and Eliza's confidence grew. She began submitting short stories to local publications. And while the first few rejections stung, she kept writing. Slowly, her work began to find an audience. A small one at first. But it was enough to fuel her belief that she was on the right path. One day, as the first signs of spring began to warm the town, Eliza received an email that would change everything. A renowned literary magazine had accepted one of her stories for publication. The email was short, but it was enough to make her heart race with excitement. Eliza sat down at her desk, rereading the email over and over again, disbelief slowly giving way to exhilaration. This was it. This was the opportunity she had been waiting for. She was no longer just dreaming of a different life. She was living it. That afternoon, she went to the cliffs to find Oliver. She had to share the news with him. As usual, he was sitting on the large rock, sketchbook in hand. Eliza didn't waste any time. She ran to him, breathless, and held up her phone with the email open on the screen. "I did it," she exclaimed. "They accepted my story." Quote. Oliver's face broke into a wide smile, his eyes shining with pride. "I knew you could do it. You just had to believe in yourself." As Eliza sat beside him, a sense of contentment washed over her. She had found her path, not by waiting for life to hand her answers, but by taking the first step, however small, toward the things she loved. "You were right," she said, her voice filled with gratitude. "It wasn't about leaving Veridale or finding something else. It was about finding myself." Oliver nodded, his smile deepening. "And sometimes, the best things are right where you are. You just have to see them."